let's talk about castration as an extreme form of body modification. And this is a really interesting one, and I've kind of separated it out because there is a long history of castration among human beings and human society. And so I think this is worth talking a little bit about. The earliest records in Western civilization for intentionally produced castration come from ancient Sumeria around the 21st century BC. And the castration was performed for a wide variety of purposes. But typically early on, what we found is that castration was done because we had few men fathering most of the children. Remember I talked to you about this before? We had lots of guys, leaders, people high up on the dominance hierarchy who were fathering lots of children with multiple women. And so you had what we call harems, coming from the Turkish idea of harems, where you have one important high resource male fathering lots of children with all these women. Now you got all these women, your harem gets large enough, it's very difficult for you as an individual to do mate guarding, right? Guarding your mates, right? And making sure that other men aren't sneaking in there, and you have children from those women in your harem who are not biologically yours. So what do? You got to guard that thing. You got to get somebody to guard it. You can't trust any man because they'll have needs. And so what you do is that you get men and either voluntarily or forcefully castrate them. If they're castrated, the idea is they will lose interest in these women and they will not be able to father children with them. And so this is where our word eunuch comes from. Eunuch is a Greek word, and it literally means bed keeper, keeper of the beds, somebody who watches over the beds. We'll talk also about castrati in history. You've found use in music and religious functions, as well as government functions and even military leaders. And some of that stuff will also be very interesting. Now, this comes from the ancient Greek. They say if you want to portray a male who commits the crime of mutilating himself, they draw a beaver, because the latter, when chased by hunters, tears off its own testicles and leaves them behind as prey. So this is what the ancient Greeks thought beavers did. As far as I know, talking to biologists, beavers do not do this. But this is what they thought back in the day, that the beaver was the sign of a guy who basically is castrated. Now, it's very interesting because beaver has come to mean other things symbolically, which is quite fascinating. But maybe it had some roots in this. I don't know. Think about that. Now, very interesting, we'll talk a little bit about the Greek myth of Cybele. She was a goddess of nature and healing, and likely originated in what is now Asia Minor, which would be modern Turkey, near the town of Pergamum, which is on the coast below modern Istanbul, near Mount Ida. And she may have be a goddess that was derived from Rhea, who was the mother of Zeus and Demeter, and she's commonly referred to as the Great Mother. So she may have some relationship with these other Great Mother figures in Greek mythology. I didn't put any notes here, so you have to listen to me. She had a son whose name was Attis. And the myth goes something like this, that Attis, they're very close, mother and son are very close. Attis starts growing up, he reaches a certain age, and like many young men, he now starts becoming interested in other women besides mommy. And this is something that mothers have to deal with this. Their sons get to a certain age, they have to, normal relationship, be supportive of their sons individuating, going out and finding their own mates, etc., etc., etc. But in the case of Cybele and Attis, that does not occur. She's very jealous and very upset that he is now not going to pay attention to mommy, but is interested in other girls. So she basically, I think the story goes something like she drugs him or something and snip, 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 castrates him. This has an unfortunate effect on him that drives him crazy, and that is part of the, that's basically death. Not very happy. But I'll go on and tell you this inspires a whole religious cult. That's really interesting. I've always thought that as a psychotherapist, seeing young men who come into my office who have overbearing mothers, I've often thought about writing about the Sibylle complex, that how overbearing mothers can castrate their sons, at least symbolically, so the sons don't individuate, they don't go out and become their own men and have their own adult relationships with women, but instead, have to sort of maintain tethered to mommy. Or if they do have relationships with women, they'll go out and form a relationship with a woman who is overbearing, who has that same sort of overbearing motherly qualities to them. So remember, I don't know, was this class, it was probably the personality theory class, I talked about Jung's idea of the anima, the animus, and I talked about women. I talked to you guys about women going for the bad boys, right? They have the bad boy complex. Men who have an anima complex don't go necessarily for the bad girls. Sometimes they do, especially if she's got lots of tattoos. But a lot of times for men, you'll see the animus being conflated with the mother image, the mother archetype. And what will happen is men will end up with women who are very, very controlling of them. And they're, this is the kind of henpecked husband kind of archetype, where he can't do anything without her say, and she will restrict you. His friends will call, hey, let's go out and have a beer. Oh, I can't go out. My wife says I got to stay at home and, help her with the sewing or whatever it is, So you'll see this sort of aspect going on with men. So for men, that is there. The women go for the bad boys. The guys go for the over-controlling mother figure girlfriend. Right? You'll just control every aspect of his life. Right? And so you'll see these guys are just totally messed up by this. So that's sort of the flip side of at least the psychotherapy when you see people in practice of the females going for the bad boys, the guy goes for this kind of woman. And it has more, in my opinion, it's more of a psychological thing. I think it's due to the lack of individuation. I would like to call this the Sibylle complex. So, trademark. But this is something you see if you do psychotherapy with young men. Now, it's not a very fun story, but none of these Greek mythology, not very many of them are very fun or have happy endings. But that does not stop them from becoming like cults. And back in the day in ancient Rome, there were cults of Sibylle, and they would parade around down the streets carrying a statue of her, and they were acolytes, priests who were castrated, who castrated themselves voluntarily to show their devotion to her. And they would go down the street supposedly, and people would work themselves up into a frenzy. And supposedly young men would have a spiritual revelation and rush out into the procession and take a knife or sword and snip themselves right then and there. That seems a little apocryphal because obviously they're going to need medical attention right afterward. But supposedly that happened, and this is where they attracted members. Who knows? Okay? And this is actually a representation of this, the cult of Sibylle. And you see if you go to Rome, and I believe this is in the Capitolano Museum. Here is I can't remember. I think I may be wrong about that, but here is a statue of Attis, her son, and you'll notice. Conveniently, nothing's there. You'll see some other statues of him. Here's another one of him. Okay, let's talk a little bit about ancient China. Ancient China is one of the places where we know castration was practiced, and this is a very interesting phenomenon for a couple reasons. First of all, castration in ancient China was seen as a way to have a really, really great career. The reason for castration was because the emperor had a harem, a huge harem in ancient China. And if you go to China, you can go to these palaces. You can see the emperor's palace. You can see where the harem was kept. If you take our class in the fall, History Psych 436, History and Psychology of East Asian Warrior Cultures, we will show you a film in the class, The Last Emperor, and in this you will see all these places. You'll see the harem, you'll see the places where they actually shot him in these historical places. You'll see where this stuff occurred. So shameless plug, take the class in the fall. It's going to fill up very quickly, so if you're thinking about taking it, sign up. So, but again, the Chinese emperor is sacrosanct. There should be nobody fathering children but the emperor. And so, how do you guard the harem? You have to get eunuchs to do this. You have to get castrated men to do this. So, there arose in ancient China a whole class of people who would get this job, and this was a very high prestige job. And a lot of these eunuchs who did this job, they were in close proximity to the emperor. They became trusted advisors to the emperor, and in many cases were given governmental positions later on, the governor of a province, or they became military commanders. They rose very high up in the hierarchy. And so this was really considered to be a very good career move for you. And so, but this was a voluntary thing. And most of the men who did this were middle-aged men. Some of them even already had families. And the idea was that, you want to move ahead in your job, you want to move up, this is what you have to do. And so I was imagining, myself, so that somebody came to me and said, Kevin, like you're just a lowly professor, making, not a whole terrible lot. Wouldn't you like to make like hundreds of thousands of dollars a year? Like, wouldn't you like a salary of $300,000 or $400,000 a year? You could become a university president. And we have a job for you to become university president. San Francisco State University is looking for a president right now. So what if they came to me? What if the chancellor's office came to me and said, Kevin, we want to make you president of San Francisco State University. Just one little catch. That in order to do this, snip, snip, snip. Yikes. Well, you already got a kid. You're not going to have any more kids. You already have a kid. Really? What are you preserving there, Okay, well, I have to think about it. How much you pay me? Oh, $400,000 a year. Well, I don't know. That's a lot of money. Right? Now, personally for me, no way, but that's just me. Other people may have a different... Actually, I probably wouldn't even do it even if they didn't snip, because it's a terrible job. Actually, no, I take that back. $400,000 I put together. But by the way, nobody is coming to me giving those kind of offers. That's just an example. So this is what happened in ancient China. And so, a lot of people in China, eventually some guys said, yeah, I think that's a good deal. Sex life really isn't going, it's not really much what it used to be, and I'm not really giving up that much, so I'm going to go do this. So what they would do is what sprang up around the palace were whole sections of town that were populated by doctors who specialized in doing castrations. In fact, this is one of the earliest recorded successful surgical procedures that's been documented. And you would go to these doctors, these castration doctors, and you'd pay them a certain amount of money, and they would have a mini stages where they would ask you, are you sure you want to do this? And you go, yeah, I'm sure. You pay them the money, and then they would prepare you for the surgery. And preparing you for the surgery involved basically bathing your genitals, your penis and scrotum, in a solution of hot chili peppers. And I always thought, this is nuts. That would really hurt, And then I went over to this new restaurant, which is over in Thousand Oaks in Newbury Park. And the place is called, I'm not making this up, it's called Spring Dong. So it fits in with this lecture. And they are an authentic Szechuan place. Actually, one of the other professors, Dr. Key, told me to go there because she likes Asian food. And you go there and you get really authentic Szechuan food. I mean, it is really authentic. It's pretty good. And one of the dishes had this really, everything Szechuan food has tons of hot peppers in it. I mean, Szechuan is known for hot peppers. So you go to this place, every single thing in the menu's got hot peppers on it. And I got one dish that had this special kind of hot peppers, and I ate this food, and my mouth went numb. And I said, oh, that's the peppers they used for the operation there. And then I figured it out. It wasn't just hot peppers. It was a special kind of hot pepper that numbed the area. And it really numbs your mouth. You really feel it's very delicious, by the way.
What was the name of the place?
Spring Dong. Something like that. That's what I tell my kids it's called. It's something like that. It's over there in Newbury Park off Ventu, left on Ventu. There's a Walgreens there and stuff. It's right in that little place, new shopping center. Starbucks over there now. So you can go there and try this out, and then imagine using this in other parts of your body. So they would bathe the genitals in the hot pepper numbing stuff. And then again, they would say, are you sure you want to do it? You sure? And you say, yeah, grit my teeth. Yep, I'm down for it. I want that 400,000 a year. And they would grab the genitals very expertly with a sharp curved knife. One blow, cut off the junk. And then they would stop the blood up. And they had some herbs and stuff for this. And they had herbs that had antibiotic qualities. And they would insert some sort of tube into the urethra. And they would get you up right away and walk you around. Keep the circulation going and make sure you didn't just succumb to shock. And the idea was after a day or two, if you could pee, the operation was considered to be a success. Because the worry was that you would scar over and you can't pee, and then you're going to die from the bladder filling up and then, exploding. But they had a very high success rate in this operation. Very, very high success rate. They became very good at it. And they had herbal medicine for antibiotics and things. They became very, very good at this. And then what would happen is you would stay there and you would heal up, I don't know, a month or whatever it took you to heal up. And they would take your junk, I'm using the technical terms here, they would take your genitals and they would put it in a special wine, alcohol, and preserve them and give it to you in a jar. And that was considered to be very, very important because the idea was that when you died in the afterlife, that you would be reunited with your genitals, but only if you kept them. So if you lost them, or the jar broke and then, dog ran off with them or whatever, you were in trouble. So then you would have to go procure another set. So apparently there was a black market for buying these genitals, and so you hold on to those your whole life. And then you go and you work in the palace and you make tons of money and you become very powerful. And so this is a picture, actually, the last, one of the last living eunuchs. And they, this went up until the 1800s or something, early 1900s. There were still eunuchs that were alive. And this is a picture of some of the actually photography was invented. So here's a guy who was a eunuch. And the special statues. Some of these guys became really famous. Again, I'm going to show you in the 436 class in the fall. I'm probably going to show this maybe. I might not. We usually show a movie that depicts one of the bad guys, bad evil general. As and you would probably say, oh, they're making him sound like stereotypically gay, not like a real gay person, but like a over the top, flaming stereotype gay person. But the truth is that they meant that guy to be a eunuch, and the Chinese watching that movie would see that guy as a eunuch. Really? Yeah, and he became very powerful. What did you say? You just said something?
Or they said this stereotypical gay person, so a gay person from a movie in the 1990s.
Yeah, which is probably offensive to gay people, by the way.
It very much is.
So when you watch this movie, realize they're not depicting a gay person; they're depicting a eunuch. And he's very powerful. And he's very evil, by the way. I won't tell you what happens. Yeah. Yes.
So, just because they take the genitals away, would men still have sexual urges, but no way to relieve themselves?
It depends on the age of the person. So if the man has had normal sexual development and then it's taken away, the mental stuff is still there. So there can be some mental urges there, but there'd be less testosterone produced, and then obviously the equipment isn't there anymore.
Yeah.
So, but the urges can still exist. And we could talk about chemical castration with pedophiles with regard to that. I don't know if Deb talked to you about that, but that's something we see in pedophiles a little bit. Yes?
So the emperor is the one, this was his rule that he made for these years?
Yeah, well, I mean, it was traditional, yeah.
So
one of the emperors starting way back when made this rule, and it just kept going down.
Was it mainly just to keep them focused on serving him?
No, it's mainly to keep them from impregnating the women. And having somebody guard the women, his harem, all these women, all his concubines, and not letting them be impregnated by other men.
Got it.
Any babies that came out were, he could be certain that they were his. Right? So the women were sequestered. Wow. Nobody was allowed to visit them. They weren't allowed out, and they were guarded by these eunuchs. So it was a very important job. And because the emperor was there a lot, the eunuchs had the ear of the emperor, and that becomes important too. Yeah, very interesting. Okay. It's a fascinating piece of Chinese history. We don't have time to talk about foot binding this semester, which is another important piece of Chinese history that we won't get into. But maybe in the future. And by the way, if you went down the line, you saw this sort of sign. This told you this was the eunuch doctors hang outside their things. You knew this is where you went. Okay. Now we know something about castration. If you get castrated at a young enough age, like pre-puberty, you develop a body that's very long and sort of soft. You don't develop as much musculature. Men don't go bald. By the way, this is not somebody who's a eunuch. This is an individual with Marfan syndrome, but the appearance of the body is very similar. So I put the picture up there. And there were cases where eunuchs were made from younger kids. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Also, we know this from animal husbandry, right? If you are going to go and raise an animal, a pig or a cow or something, that if you take the males and castrate them, they will get fatter and juicier and more delicious to eat. This is true with chickens or other fowl. They call them capons. They've been castrated. And so you know that they become juicier and more delicious to eat. So we've done this with animals. This also applies to human beings. I'm going to talk to you in a couple of weeks about cannibalism. But supposedly the Caribbean Indians, native Caribbeans, who practiced cannibalism would take prisoners of war in some of their battles, and they would castrate the men in order to fatten them up. They'd castrate them, and they'd get nice and fat and juicy, and then they'd kill them and eat them. Yum. We're going to talk more about that later on. Okay? So they were known for castrating people involuntarily. There was a 18th century Russian religious sect called the Skopsi, who became very, very popular. Again, this is an example of these groups there where one person does it, then everybody sort of jumps on the bandwagon. These guys became very popular in Russia, and they were essentially a castration cult. And this is a book written about it. It's really quite fascinating by Laura Ingelstein, Castration in the Heavenly Kingdom. I highly recommend it if you want some good summer reading. What they were known as the people of God, and they became known as the Skopets, which means castrate, castrati in Russian, the archaic Russian language. And this was basically started by this peasant, Andrei Ivanov, who was basically convinced that castration was the way that you got closer to God. Again, you scourged the body to free the spirit. And apparently he was able to do this himself and also convince other people to do it. And then it sort of caught on and other people started doing it. It became like a fad, and lots of people started doing it to the point where the government became very concerned and had to sort of suppress this. Because by that time, you even had individuals of high status, people with money and high status, joining the cult and castrating themselves. Not only did men become castrated, but women would also remove breasts and mutilate their genitals as part of this cult. And it was very interesting. So the main feature was castration and sexual mutilation. Okay? And the idea was they believed that after the expulsion from the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve had the halves of forbidden fruit grafted onto their bodies, forming testicles and breasts. Thus, the removal of these sexual organs restored the Skopsis to the pristine state before original sin. Okay, so this is the way you get back to being closer to God before the original sin, is by removing these things. Okay? There were two kinds of mutilation, the lesser and greater seal, i.e. partial and complete mutilation. For men, the lesser mutilation was removal of the testicles only, while the greater mutilation was removal of the penis as well. And they felt that they were fulfilling Christ's counsel of perfection, which is found in Matthew. And usually, for females, breasts were amputated, but there are also suggestions that labia were also removed as well. So again, this is a very interesting thing. And then what happened is eventually, the government suppressed it, and eventually it sort of died out. Okay. But it took a while, and it had a lot of followers, really a surprisingly number of followers. I'll talk to you a little bit about the castrati. So this is another place where people were castrated. Kids, young boys were castrated. Part of a religious tradition, but not for religious reasons per se. And this happened in the Catholic Church, where young boys, they noticed that they would have them singing in the choir. They have these beautiful voices, Then they would reach puberty, their voices would start cracking and sound ugly, and they thought, you know, if there's only some way to prevent these beautiful young boys from having these horrible voices and going into puberty. And somebody thought, well, you know, we have a way. We know how to do this with animals. And so what they did is they would take some of these young boys and they would castrate them. And then they would keep these beautiful voices forever as they grew into adulthood. They would certainly have some changes in their body. They would not become bald. They would become kind of long-limbed and a little bit more rounded in their physique. And but some of these castrati, this is a tradition that lasted for quite a long time, from the 1600s, 1500s, all the way up until the last castrati, I think, died in the early 1900s. And so this was something that was done. It became something that became, I mean, quote, voluntary, unquote. I mean, because sometimes the parents would be the ones who would be making the decision. But the idea was you take this young boy, you know, maybe he's 8 or 9 years old, you castrate him, and he has a singing career. And so we have preserved from history this letter. This is a letter of a guy named Charles de Saint-Evremond, lived around 1685, encouraging a young page called Derry to undergo the operation to be castrated. So I'll try to read this to you. Clumsy and coarse people have been talking to you bluntly about having yourself castrated. An expression so ugly and so detestable that it would have revolted anyone less sensitive than you. As for me, I shall try to obtain what is best for you in a less unpleasant way, and shall indicate as gently as possible that you must have yourself, quote, rounded off, unquote, by means of a minor operation, which will ensure the delicacy of your complexion for a long time and the beauty of your voice forever. The advantages that follow the operation are widely recognized today. And if Monsieur Derry in his natural state could have one mistress, Monsieur Derry, when rounded off, could have 100. You will have no wife, so you will be exempt from something very bad. You will be happy at all at having no wife, happier still at having no children. Monsieur Derry's daughter would get herself pregnant, his son would get himself hanged, and what is most certain, his wife would make him a cuckold. Protect yourself from all these calamities by one swift operation. You will remain devoted entirely to yourself, proud of such a small advantage that will make your fortune and cause everyone to be your friend. So there you go. There you have it. Don't try this. It's already too late for all you guys in here anyway. So this was the idea. So this is the idea. And so you got to think of these castrati. They became like the rock stars of their day. So think like, you know, the Mick Jagger of their day. And so they would have this around. Now this operation typically was just done. It was just the testicles that were removed. So the castrati would have a fully functioning penis. The motivation to have sex probably was lessened because they didn't have as much testosterone, but they could still perform sexually. And many of these guys became, they had many lovers, because it was back in the day. This is before there was very good birth control. You could take a lover who was a castrati and not have to worry about getting pregnant. And they were rock stars, you know, like Mick Jagger level rock stars of the day. And so there were a lot of women interested in them. So when he says you could have 100 lovers, he really is serious about that. These guys became very, very popular. And so again, this is something in probably why this persisted for so long. And you can hear, I should have got this for you because I don't think I have it. I wasn't able to find it, but there actually is a recording of the last castrati singing, and you can listen to the voice, and it's really quite beautiful. It's one of the earliest, you know, like 78 records, so it's really scratchy, but you know, the voice is really beautiful. So this was another area where castration really persisted into the modern day. Okay. Now, that's not to say that you don't have other kinds of castration, even later than this, involuntary castration. Certainly, we know during World War II, I talked about my other class about Nazi medical experimentation, and there was some castration involved in that, and there was all sorts of different kinds of castration using X-rays and chemicals as well. Nazis were really into this kind of stuff. So we do, and you still find in some war-torn places Sometimes, captives will be castrated. So you still see this kind of behavior. But as far as voluntary castration is concerned on a large basis, we don't see much of this kind of stuff anymore. Okay. Now, and again, why would you have men, have these high voices and be able to sing? Partly because back in the day, women were really not allowed to become professional singers. And as women were allowed to have careers and become professional singers and sing these high tenor parts or alto parts that these men would have been singing, the need for the castrated men becomes less, and you can have women singing these parts. Okay, I mentioned to you already about the Hijra, usually considered a member of the third sex, neither man nor women. Most are physically male or have ambiguous intersex genitalia, but some are female. They generally see themselves as female in gender and typically dress as women, and again, the men would usually undergo some sort of castration. Okay? Estimated between 50,000 and 5 million Hijra in modern India alone, but many Asian countries also have some version of the Hijra, sort of intersect, third sex people. You may hear about these lady boys in Thailand, these transsexuals in Thailand, following that same sort of cultural class. Two stories connected with the Hijra. One is that there was a village goddess who they worship, and the goddess and her sister go to a mela, which is a festival. And they are attacked by a man who tries to molest them. The woman's name is Bahuchar, and she takes a knife and cuts her breasts and bleeds to death. While she's dying, she curses the man, and he begs for forgiveness. She tells him he must dress as a woman and worship her. So that's one of the origins. The other origin is a young woman sees her husband neglecting her and going off on a white horse every night. One night she decides to follow him. A jungle fowl, i.e. a chicken, tells her she can ride on it. She finds her husband engaged in what can now be termed unmanly behavior, what they mean is gay sex. She confronts him and asks him why he had married her if his preferences were otherwise. She castrates him in anger and becomes a Devi, which is a demigod, and makes a proclamation that men like him must worship her. Okay, so again, this idea of conflating men who are gay with men who want to be women. And we know that that's not really the case, right? Here's the picture of her riding on the rooster there. I mentioned Nazi castration experiments. There's a before and after picture here. You sometimes find castration for religious reasons. You find this not just back in the ancient or back in historical times with the Russians and the Skopsi, but there are some cases of this happening in modern times. And one of them is this Heaven's Gate cult. You guys might have heard about this, remembered this. And this guy's name was Marshall Applewhite, something like this. And here's a quote from him. We take the prize, I guess, of being the cults of all cults. So they had this idea that this comet was going by Earth, the Hale-Bopp comet. And that, that if they killed themselves, they would leave their bodies and go to the comet and be taken away from Earth and live in this sort of heavenly paradise kind of thing. So, end of the day, what happened was they all, I don't know, they drank cyanide or something, put a bag over their head, went to sleep, and committed suicide. This was down in San Diego somewhere. Committed suicide. And when they went and found the bodies of these people, they found that the males, many of the males, had been castrated. And it turned out what they had done is they had gone down to Mexico and found a surgeon down there who would perform castration on them. And the idea again is, you don't want to be distracted by things of the flesh, and so by being castrated, you can focus on your spiritual life, that as it may be. So here, just because you haven't heard a crazy cult member today,
classroom, or in old language a couple thousand years ago, disciples. Those who are trying to prepare themselves for entry into the evolutionary level above human, synonymous with the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven. We're going to talk to you about the most urgent thing that is on our mind, and what we suspect is the most urgent thing on the minds of those who will connect with us. We'll title this tape Planet Earth About to be Recycled. Your only chance to evacuate is to leave with us. Planet Earth about to be recycled. Your only chance to survive or evacuate is to leave with us. Now,
Okay, I don't know about you guys, I'm convinced. No, not really. So, again, imagine people watching this. This is an initiation tape. Imagine people watch this and going, yeah, you know, sure, you got something there. I think I gotta like join these guys and like figure out how to get the hell out of here, right? So, but, you know, apparently some people, this message got through to them, and that's exactly what they did, and they were willing up into that point, even, you know, before they actually evacuated to, you know, to remove their genitals. So, go figure. Again, my hope is that this class will inoculate you against these kind of things, that you will not fall for this kind of stuff. But a lot of people will, okay? So don't underestimate how gullible people are. Auto-castration. People who just castrate themselves. This usually is associated with psychosis. So again, the voice is telling you to do it, you know, you do it. So again, we have a number of psychiatric cases where this has occurred in the literature. I think I may have given you guys one as one of your readings. And so this is usually connected with psychosis. I don't think I need to say much more about that. Usually it's part of the psychotic process. We should end by talking a little bit about sex reassignment surgery. This is, again, the idea that somebody has some sort of body dysphoria or gender dysphoria. You know, I really feel like I'm a woman, I'm in a man's body, but I'm really a woman. And so, you know, I really need to become a woman, and I'm going to figure out a way to do that. And now we have surgery that will allow this to happen. We have the technology to allow this to happen. And so I'm going to do this. Okay? And these are people who, again, have this conflict between their own self-perception of who they are gender-wise and what their physical body is. Okay? Now, typically for sex reassignment surgery in this country, if you're thinking about this, you will be required to live in the gender, the opposite gender, for, I think it's at least a year. And you're also required to get psychotherapy of some form for at least a year. And then you take hormones and you live as the thing. And then, you know, you live as a woman. Yeah, I really like this. This is what I'm in. I'm down for this. And then you decide to go to the final step and have your genitals reconstructed. And so, of course, as you might imagine, constructing the male to female genitals is a little bit easier. I wouldn't say it's easy, but it's easier, and you can create female genitals, and the person can still be sexually functional. In other words, they can still reach orgasm, these kind of things. Because what happens is the penis is essentially inverted, and a canal is created, and penis is inverted, and so the person can have some sexual function. This is if it's done correctly. And of course the technology for doing this has gotten a lot better. Creating female to male, creating a penis is a lot more work, requires taking skin grafts, and of course, you know, to make the artificial penis erect, you have to have some sort of implantation of some sort of, usually it's like a pump system, and then that can happen. But that generally is not seen as quite successful as the male to female surgery. Now, what I've done in the past is shown videos of the surgery. It is really close to lunch, so I think I may avoid that. If you want to see videos of this stuff, it's online. You can find it. It's there. And so again, there's a process for doing this. There's a process for doing this. Now, if you just decide, no, I really don't like this process. I don't want to wait a year. I really need to have this done yesterday. You can just get on the plane and fly to Thailand, where they have excellent surgeons, and have this done, and for a lot cheaper, by the way. and you can have it done. So, if where there's a will, there's a way. If you really feel like you need to have this done, you can find somebody who will do it. Okay. Some psychologists, psychoanalysts feel that people who get this sort of surgery, what happens in a lot of cases is that they get this done, but they're still not satisfied with their body. They have more of a body dysphoria. It's more of a psychological issue, and then they keep getting more stuff done. They keep getting different kinds of surgeries to try to find the sort of perfection that to get rid of this body dysphoria. I don't know that that's the majority of cases now. I think if you talk to psychoanalytically minded people, especially the old school people, they would say, yeah, that's everybody in this. And again, my dad's written about this being sort of a bodily hallucination kind of a thing. This is why when he goes to San Francisco to give a talk, there'll be people out in front protesting, you don't understand what trans people are really about. I think the modern research literature is indicating that, what happens is that the brain becomes sexualized early on in development. And so there's a number of things that can go on in the brain development in utero that might predispose the person to feel like either they're male or they're female. Like maybe they are female, but something goes on and causes the developing brain to get a bunch of testosterone, and the brain becomes masculinized. And then so the person grows up, they have a female body, but they have a male brain. Right, and there's a number of, and sometimes in some of these cases, this can also affect the genitalia, and you get these people who are intersexed and this kind of stuff. And again, if you take clinical psychology from me, I have a little lecture on that. I'll go into detail about that because I think it's been talked about a lot, and I think as clinicians in the modern world, we need to know about that. But this can also happen where the genitals aren't affected, but the brain is affected. And I think there's been more research done on that lately, and that to me seems probably a good indicator of this gender dysphoria. And my guess is that they're going to do is they're going to end up coming up with ways to see if the brain has been feminized or masculinized during development, regardless of what the body is. And I think that in the future they'll be able to say, oh, this person, they really got a female brain, but they're in a male body, and vice versa. And then they may be able to say this, well, this person doesn't have some sort of psychological issue with dysphoria, but there's really a physiological mismatch going on here. And I think in the future you're probably going to be seeing ways of detecting that, because this has been something that's been in the media quite a lot lately, and probably needs to be considered. There's been some stuff in the media lately with these kids. So you have a kid who's like 8 or 9 or 10 years old, and they're a male body, but they say they're female, and the parents are now in the gender of their preference to grow up as female. I know there's been at least one of these cases has been on TV quite a bit, and it'd be interesting to follow these individuals and see what happens to them in the future. But in some of these cases, we're not getting any sense of something like family irregularities or developmental irregularities that would lead to some sort of psychological dysfunction. We're just seeing the kid being very insistent that they really feel like they're female when their body is male. And I'm sure there's cases that are the opposite way around. They feel that the body is female, but they really feel they're male. Okay. So again, there's been a lot of shows on TV. There's been a lot of stuff in the media about transsexual people lately. There's been a lot about transsexual rights. A lot pointed out how transsexual people are discriminated against and treated very poorly and are assaulted at a much higher level than cisgendered people. And again, I think the awareness of this is very good, because we really as a society, I think, need not to be stigmatizing people due to what's between their legs, due to what their sexuality is. And again, as psychologists, this is something that you may see in your practice. You may see transgender people, you may see people interacting with transgendered people coming to you, and it's very good for you to have a good sense of how this stuff works and what's going on for these folks. And I feel I'm personally very happy that transgender people are getting some airtime in the media about some of the things they have to put up with. And of course, all the stuff about transgender people in the military and this kind of stuff that you've probably heard about recently. And so 2 steps forward, 1 step backward, right? But at least it's starting to air the the grievances out in public. Right? Okay, that's all I'm going to talk about.